The vast amphitheater of the Intergalactic University of Connections buzzed with the sounds of hundreds of students from dozens of species settling into their seats. Some floated, some crawled, some extended themselves into gaseous forms to occupy more comfortable spaces between the traditional seating arrangements. The lecture hall was equipped with the latest holographic technology, atmospheric adjusters for various biological needs, and translation matrices that rendered all communication into standard. The linguistic compromise developed after centuries of misunderstandings. At the center of the stage stood Professor Xandor Quills, the galaxy's foremost expert in xenomythology. His 4 eyes blinked in sequence as he adjusted his tentacular appendages, preparing his secondary voice box for the presentation. The amphitheater lights dimmed automatically, sensing his readiness to begin. Welcome, esteemed students, to Advanced Xenomythology 57, Quills began, his primary voice resonating through the hall, while his secondary voice provided harmonic emphasis on key terms. Today, we continue our exploration of galactic folklore with perhaps the most persistent myth in recorded history: humans. A ripple of amusement coursed through the audience. Several gaseous entities pulsed with luminescence, their equivalent of laughter. A group of Raxians clicked their mandibles appreciatively, while a cluster of gelatinous melves trembled in anticipation. Yes, yes, Quills continued, his tentacles waving dismissively. I understand your enthusiasm. The human myth has persisted for nearly 40,000 galactic cycles, appearing in over 40 distinct ancient cultures. But as scholars, we must approach even the most entertaining myths with critical analysis. He activated the central holographic display with a gesture, and a 3-dimensional image appeared. A bipedal figure with 2 arms, 2 legs, a single head containing a single brain, and only 2 eyes. Behold, the human, supposedly the dominant species of the mythical Earth. Note the completely implausible anatomical structure. His tertiary tentacle pointed at various aspects of the hologram. Exactly 4 limbs, no more, no less. A bilateral symmetry so perfect it borders on the absurd. Only 2 visual organs, leaving enormous blind spots. And most ridiculous of all, a single, centralized brain with no backup processing centers. The students laughed more openly now. A Talvi student in the front row, a sentient crystal formation, refracted light in a pattern that indicated skepticism. Professor, the Talvi's melodic voice chimed, why would such an obviously fictional creature appear across so many ancient cultures? An excellent question. Quills extended 2 tentacles in the Talvi's direction, a gesture of academic appreciation. This is precisely why the human myth fascinates xenomythologists. The persistence of this particular impossible creature across disparate civilizations suggests a common archetypal need, a psychological projection of what simple minds once imagined as the perfect form. Quills manipulated the controls, and the hologram rotated to display the internal structure of the supposed human. Look at this respiratory system, completely vulnerable to environmental toxins. A circulatory system with a single pump. Bones made of calcium. As if that could support complex movement in anything larger than a Yaltian sandcrawler. More laughter rippled through the hall. But what truly makes the human myth absurd is not the physical impossibility. It's the psychological contradictions. Quills switched to a new holographic display, showing various scenes of supposed human activity. According to ancient texts, humans were simultaneously fragile yet resilient, competitive yet cooperative, logical yet deeply emotional, individual yet collective. These are mutually exclusive traits that no actual species could possess simultaneously. A slight tremor ran through the floor of the lecture hall. Several students looked around nervously. Merely the environmental control system adjusting, Quills assured them, though one of his eyes darted toward the emergency indicator panel near the exit. Now, Let us examine the most fascinating aspect of the human myth, their supposed capacity for completely useless artistic expression. A louder tremor interrupted him, and this time, the emergency lights began to pulse red. An automated voice announced in 17 languages, "Attention! An unidentified vessel has breached orbital perimeter. Landing detected in northern quadrant. This is not a drill." The students erupted in alarmed vocalizations, some changing colors rapidly, others dissolving into protective forms. Several younger Raxians began secreting defensive mucus. "Remain calm!" Quills attempted to regain control of the situation. "The security forces will handle this intrusion. However, for safety reasons, I am terminating today's lecture. Please exit in orderly." The massive doors at the rear of the amphitheater burst open with a hydraulic hiss. Students turned. Tentacles and sensory appendages extended in alarm. In the doorway stood a figure that caused a collective gasp to ripple through the room. It was bipedal. It had 2 arms, 2 legs, and 1 head containing 2 forward-facing eyes. It was impossibly a human. "Hello there," the creature said in perfect standard. "Sorry to interrupt. Captain Jake Parker of the Terran exploration vessel Curiosity. Would this happen to be the Xenomythology department?" Complete chaos erupted. Several gaseous students instantly diffused in panic. A MELV student liquefied entirely, flowing under the seats in terror. The Talvi student crystallized into a defensive formation, light refracting wildly through its suddenly rigid structure. Professor Quills stood frozen, all 4 eyes locked on the impossible creature. His tentacles went limp, and his secondary voice box produced an involuntary harmonic of pure shock. The human, Captain Parker, looked around at the pandemonium with apparent confusion. "Was it something I said?" Before Quills could respond, more humans appeared behind Parker, 7 or 8 of them, slightly varied in skin tone and size, but all unmistakably conforming to the mythical template displayed in the hologram, still rotating behind the professor. "We've been trying to contact your administration for permission to land," Parker continued, seemingly oblivious to the fact that his very existence was causing an academic crisis. "No one responded to our hails, so we decided to find someone in person. Your orbital security is really quite lax, by the way." Quills finally managed to speak, though his voice emerged as a strangled whisper. "You cannot exist." Parker raised an eyebrow, another supposedly human trait that Quills had lectured about just last semester. "I assure you, Professor, we exist. And judging by that hologram behind you, you seem to know something about us. Though I must say," he gestured toward the displayed internal anatomy, "you've got several details wrong." One of the other humans, a female with darker skin and straight black hair pulled into a tight knot, stepped forward with a small device in her hand. "Captain, I'm detecting unusual temporal radiation signatures in this room, consistent with the patterns we observed on Proxima b." "Interesting, Lieutenant Torres," Parker replied, then turned back to Quills. "Professor, I couldn't help but overhear part of your lecture as we approached. You seem to be teaching that humans are mythological creatures?" Quills straightened his posture, academic pride temporarily overcoming his shock. "Humans are a persistent cross-cultural myth. What you appear to be is standing right in front of you." Parker completed the sentence with a smile. "A myth made flesh, so to speak." From the far corner of the lecture hall, another voice called out. A voice Quills recognized with dread. Professor Melvadoon, his academic rival and proponent of the wildly controversial mythic truth hypothesis, which suggested that ancient myths often contained kernels of historical fact. "I knew it!" Melvadoon's voice warbled with excitement, her tentacular crown fully extended in academic triumph. "40 years I've argued that the human myths had factual origins. And here they are. Vindication." Quills felt his chromatophores darken with embarrassment. This couldn't be happening. His entire academic career, 17 published texts on the impossibility of humans, was collapsing before his 4 eyes. "I'm Lieutenant Maya Torres, science officer." The female human introduced herself, still scanning the room with her device. "And this certainly explains a lot about our reception, or lack thereof. You literally thought we couldn't exist." Another human stepped forward, taller and broader than the others, with pale skin and short light hair. "Commander Alexei Vulov, First Officer, if I may ask, Professor, how exactly did our species become a myth in your culture?" Quills found himself automatically shifting into lecture mode, a defensive response to the academic crisis unfolding around him. Human-like figures appear in the earliest recorded myths of over 40 ancient civilizations, dating back approximately 40,000 galactic cycles. The descriptions are remarkably consistent, despite these civilizations having no known contact with each other. The persistence of this particular mythological figure has been the subject of extensive xenomythological study. A third human, with brown skin and a neatly trimmed beard, nodded thoughtfully. "Fascinating. Dr. Omar Jackson, xenoanthropologist. Professor, what you're describing sounds like cultural memory, fragments of actual historical contact preserved through myth." Quills bristled. "Impossible. The anatomical and psychological traits attributed to humans defy basic biological principles. No species could simultaneously exhibit such contradictory characteristics." Parker chuckled. "And yet, here we stand. Perhaps you'd care to elaborate on these contradictory characteristics you find so implausible." The students who hadn't fled were now watching in fascination, their initial terror giving way to academic curiosity. Quills realized he had no choice but to continue the dialogue. His reputation, at least what remained of it, demanded it. "Very well," he said, gesturing to the holographic display. "According to the myths, humans were simultaneously extremely fragile, yet possessed extraordinary endurance. They lacked natural weapons or defenses, yet somehow became apex predators. They required constant maintenance, regular sleep, specific atmospheric conditions, narrow temperature ranges, yet supposedly adapted to virtually any environment." Parker nodded. "All true. We are fragile in many ways. A simple fall can break our bones. A small puncture can cause fatal blood loss. Yet human endurance runners can outpace almost any animal over long distances. We've survived in environments from Arctic tundra to scorching deserts." Commander Vulov stepped forward. "Our apparent contradictions are actually our greatest strengths. We lack specialized adaptations, which makes us vulnerable in specific situations, but incredibly adaptable overall." "And the psychological contradictions?" Quills challenged, finding his academic footing again. "Your myths describe humans as simultaneously selfish and altruistic, violent and peaceful, rational and irrational." Dr. Jackson smiled. "Also accurate. Human psychology embraces paradox. We can be ruthlessly competitive in one context and selflessly cooperative in another. We can apply cold logic to splitting atoms while creating art that serves no survival purpose whatsoever." At the mention of art, a small, tentacled student that had been hiding beneath a seat ventured a question. "The myths say humans created objects and sounds solely for emotional responses, without practical function?" Parker's face brightened. "Ah, yes, art. One of our specialties. In fact..." He reached into a pocket and withdrew a small object, then approached the student. "Here. My grandfather carved this from wood, actual plant material from earth, simply because he found the shape pleasing." The small student, Global, one of Quill's most promising pupils, extended a tentative appendage to accept the object. It was a smooth, curved shape, with intricate patterns carved into its surface. "But what does it do?" Global asked, rotating the object cautiously. It doesn't do anything, Parker replied. That's the point. It exists solely because my grandfather found joy in creating it, and others find joy in seeing it. Quills watched in horror as Global's skin changed to the deep blue of philosophical crisis. The student was experiencing existential recalibration, a dangerous state for young academics. And music, called another human from the back of the group. Lieutenant Fiona Murray, Communications, Professor, would your audio system accept an external input? I'd like to demonstrate another useless human creation. Before Quills could object, Murray had connected her device to the lecture hall sound system. What followed was indescribable. Complex patterns of acoustic vibrations that somehow conveyed emotional states without linguistic content. The sound reverberated through the amphitheater, causing physical responses in every species present. Vibrations in the crystalline students, wave-like patterns in the gelatinous ones, color shifts in the chromatophoric species. Quills felt his own respiratory rates change in response to the sounds. It was affecting him physically. How was this possible? The ancient texts had described human music as capable of inducing emotional and physical responses across species boundaries, but he had dismissed it as poetic exaggeration. When the music ended, the silence in the hall was profound. Every remaining student was in a state of perceptual adjustment. Even Professor Melvadoon, still gloating in the corner, appeared temporarily humbled by the experience. That, Murray said into the silence, was a piece called Moonlight Sonata by a human composer named Beethoven, created over 4,000 years ago. It still moves us today. A Nexal student with multiple eye stalks raised 3 of them. But what purpose does it serve? It serves the purpose of making us feel, Murray replied simply. Just as your question serves the purpose of helping you understand. Quills found himself intellectually cornered. The evidence before him was undeniable, yet it contradicted everything he had taught for decades. The humans were real. Their supposed contradictions were actual traits. Their useless artistic expressions did indeed create cross-species responses. His entire academic framework was collapsing. How, he finally managed to ask, how have we never encountered your species before? If humans are real, why have you been absent from galactic affairs for 40,000 cycles? The humans exchanged glances, a form of nonverbal communication that Quills had also dismissed as mythological exaggeration. That, said Captain Parker, is a rather complex story. Lieutenant Torres, would you care to explain your findings? Torres stepped forward, her device still scanning the room. The temporal radiation I'm detecting in this room matches patterns we discovered on Proxima b, associated with what we believe to be a temporal displacement engine. Technology far beyond our current capabilities. We think, and this is still theoretical, that at some point in our future, humans developed or encountered this technology. And, Quills prompted, his academic curiosity overwhelming his embarrassment. And we believe this technology was used to scatter humans throughout time and space, Torres continued, effectively hiding our species across history while preserving enough of us to ensure survival. Hiding from what? Asked Professor Melvadoon, floating closer. Commander Vulov's expression darkened. From a war, a catastrophic conflict that, according to the fragments we've pieced together, was to occur between humanity and, well, a coalition very similar to your galactic alliance. A shocked murmur rippled through the remaining students. The implications were staggering. Dr. Jackson stepped forward. This would explain why human myths appear consistently across ancient cultures. They weren't myths at all. They were encounters with actual humans, displaced through time, whose existence was eventually relegated to folklore as direct evidence faded. The emergency doors at the side of the amphitheater slid open, and a new figure entered, a human female wearing an elaborate uniform adorned with symbols of authority. "Captain Parker," she called. "I see you've made first contact without following protocols. Again." Parker gave a slight shrug. "Ambassador Reeves, we were having trouble getting anyone's attention the official way. So I gathered." The woman surveyed the chaos of the lecture hall, the scattered students, the frozen professor, the still rotating hologram of human anatomy. "Professor Quills, I presume. I'm Ambassador Diana Reeves, Diplomatic Corps. I believe the Chancellor is requesting your presence in his office. Immediately. You too. Professor Melvadoon. This situation requires academic recalibration." Quills felt the weight of history shifting around him. In a single lecture, everything had changed. The myth had become reality. The impossible had become merely improbable. The fictional had become factual. "I will need to rewrite my curriculum," he said faintly. Parker laughed. Another supposedly unique human trait, now proven real. "I'd be happy to help with that, Professor. It seems you've accidentally been teaching human anthropology rather than xenomythology all along." The remaining students began to recover from their shock. Academic curiosity overcoming their initial fear. Questions erupted from all corners of the hall. "Is it true humans can regenerate limbs?" asked Araxian. "No, unfortunately," replied Dr. Jackson. "Though we can regrow liver tissue and some minor structures." "Can you really survive in vacuum for short periods?" inquired a floating gas entity. "Briefly," confirmed Torres, "though it's extremely damaging." "Do you really make jokes in the face of death?" a translucent MELV student questioned. "Absolutely," Parker said with a grin. "It's practically a requirement." Ambassador Reeves cleared her throat meaningfully. "While I appreciate the academic exchange, the Chancellor is waiting. Professor Quills, Professor Melvadoon, if you would accompany me. Captain Parker, please ensure your crew behaves themselves in our absence." As Quills moved toward the exit, still in a state of academic shock, he found himself walking alongside Captain Parker. "If humans were scattered through time to prevent a war," Quills asked quietly, "why have you revealed yourselves now? Doesn't that risk triggering the very conflict you were hidden to prevent?" Parker's expression grew serious. "Because we don't accept that future as inevitable. Professor, another supposedly human trait. We refuse to accept no-win scenarios. The myths are right about that, too. When there's no way out, humans make another way." They reached the exit, where Ambassador Reeves was waiting impatiently. "Even if it means facing an entire galactic alliance?" Quills asked. Parker smiled. "Especially then. After all, it's easier to prevent a war through friendship than through hiding. Your lecture hall just became the most important cultural exchange center in the galaxy. Professor, the next class should be interesting." As they walked toward the Chancellor's office, Quills felt his worldview continuing to shift. The humans, real, complex, contradictory, had not merely crashed his lecture. They had crashed into history itself, revealing a future of both danger and possibility. Behind them, in the lecture hall, the sounds of animated discussion between humans and alien students echoed down the corridor. Commander Vulov was explaining human sleep patterns to fascinated Raxians. Lieutenant Murray was demonstrating more music for the crystalline students. Dr. Jackson was deep in conversation with Global about the carved wooden artifact. Myths were becoming knowledge. Stories were becoming history. And somewhere in the complex tapestry of time, a war that might have been was perhaps becoming a peace that could be. When they reached the Chancellor's office, Quills turned to Parker one last time. "Your species is truly as contradictory as the myth suggested." "Thank you," Parker replied. "We consider that our finest quality." "That wasn't necessarily a compliment," Quills noted. Parker laughed. "Taking criticism as praise. Add that to your list of human contradictions. Professor." The doors to the Chancellor's office slid open, revealing a chamber filled with the highest-ranking academics and Alliance officials. all in various states of biological distress at the revelation that humans were real. As Ambassador Reeves stepped forward to begin formal introductions, Quills realized that his next lecture, if he still had a career, would be very different. No longer the human myth, but rather human studies, an introduction to the galaxy's most improbable species. Sometimes, it seemed, the most persistent myths contain the most profound truths. And sometimes, the most impossible creatures were simply waiting for the right moment to walk through the door. The news of the humans' arrival spread through the intergalactic university, faster than light through a quantum accelerator. Within hours, every student, professor, and administrative entity was engaged in frantic research, opinion forming, or simple panic. The Central Data Archives experienced unprecedented access requests as everyone sought information on the supposedly mythical species that had materialized in their midst. In the Chancellor's office, the Emergency Council had expanded to include the heads of 17 academic departments, 3 Alliance security officials, and a hastily assembled team of xenobiologists trying to make sense of human physiology. Professor Quills sat in stunned silence as Ambassador Reeves outlined the situation to Chancellor Voxblin, whose gelatinous form was oscillating between clear distress and academic excitement. The Terran exploration vessel, Curiosity, entered your space 3 standard days ago, Reeves explained. We transmitted standard first contact protocols on all frequencies used by Alliance members. When we received no response, Captain Parker made the decision to send a landing party directly to the university, where we detected transmissions referencing Earth and humanity. Those would have been from Professor Quill's lecture preparations, Melvadoon interjected, her tentacular crown still fully extended in academic triumph. I've been monitoring his schedule, hoping to catch him in error. Quills would normally have bristled at this admission of academic espionage, but he was too overwhelmed by the larger implications of the human's existence to care. We had no way of knowing you believed us to be mythological, Reeves continued. It seems the temporal displacement theory proposed by Lieutenant Torres may explain why knowledge of humanity has been relegated to folklore in your cultures. Chancellor Voxblin pulsed questioningly. You speak of temporal displacement as if it were established fact, yet claim your species doesn't possess such technology. This is problematic. We don't possess it now, Captain Parker clarified. But the evidence suggests our future selves did, or will. We've been tracking temporal anomalies for decades, ever since we detected the first radiation signatures on Proxima b. Lieutenant Torres, who had joined them in the Chancellor's office, activated a holographic display from her device. This shows the distribution of temporal radiation across known space. The pattern suggests deliberate dispersal, as if someone used the technology to systematically scatter humans throughout time and space. To hide them, Quills found himself saying, to preserve your species by making it a myth. Precisely, Parker nodded. The question is, hide from what or whom? The implications hung heavy in the room. If future humans had used time displacement technology to hide from a catastrophic war with a galactic alliance, and the current humans had now revealed themselves to that same alliance, you've potentially triggered the very conflict your future selves sought to prevent, said a security official whose species Quills didn't recognize. A new alliance member, perhaps. Or, Commander Vulov countered, we've created an opportunity to prevent that conflict from ever occurring. Chancellor Voxblin rippled thoughtfully. This is unprecedented. We have myths suddenly materialized, potential future conflicts suddenly made present concerns, and an entire species whose existence requires us to rewrite substantial portions of established academic knowledge. Don't forget the immediate diplomatic considerations, Ambassador Reeves added. The Alliance will need to decide whether to formally recognize humanity and potentially establish diplomatic relations. Professor Melvadoon's color darkened with academic excitement. And we must immediately begin documenting actual human biology, psychology, and culture. The mythological records can be compared with the living specimens to determine accuracy rates and transmission patterns. We're not specimens, Dr. Jackson corrected firmly. We're a sentient species seeking peaceful contact. Melvadoon's color shifted to embarrassment. Of course. Poor choice of terminology. The excitement of vindication has affected my linguistic precision. Chancellor Voxblin pulsed decisively. We will establish 3 immediate task forces. First, a diplomatic team to address alliance recognition and relations. Second, an academic commission to revise our understanding of humans, transitioning them from mythology to anthropology. Third, a security council to investigate these temporal displacement concerns and assess potential future conflicts. The Chancellor's form elongated toward Quills. Professor Quills, despite your previous position on human existence, your extensive knowledge of human mythology makes you the obvious choice to lead the academic commission. Professor Melvadoon will assist you. Quills felt his chromatophores darkening in protest. Not only had his entire academic position been proven catastrophically wrong, but now he was expected to work with his most smug rival to correct it. Yet, the scholar in him couldn't deny the extraordinary opportunity. He would be the first xenomythologist to study the transition of a mythological entity into documented reality. I accept, he said, his secondary voice box adding harmonic undertones of reluctance and excitement. Excellent, the Chancellor rippled. The academic commission will begin immediately. Ambassador Reeves, Captain Parker, I request that some of your crew remain available to assist Professor Quills in his research. I volunteer, Dr. Jackson said immediately. As a xenoanthropologist, I'm particularly interested in how our species has been interpreted through your cultural lenses. Lieutenant Murray and I will also assist, Torres added. My temporal research directly relates to how humans became mythologized. Very well, the Chancellor concluded. This council is adjourned to its respective task forces. Professor Quills, I expect preliminary findings by next cycle. As the meeting dispersed, Quills found himself walking back toward his department alongside Dr. Jackson, Torres, and Murray. The corridors were eerily empty. Most students and faculty had retreated to safe locations upon hearing of the humans' arrival. I still don't understand, Quills said, his academic curiosity finally overcoming his embarrassment. If your species has been scattered through time to hide from a future conflict, why reveal yourselves now? Why risk triggering that very conflict? Torres exchanged glances with Jackson before responding. Because we found something else on Proxima b, something beyond the temporal radiation signatures. What? Quills prompted when she hesitated. Evidence that the temporal displacement wasn't just about hiding, she continued. It was also about preservation, and about creating an alternative. An alternative to what? Murray answered this time. An alternative to extinction. The temporal displacement didn't just scatter humans randomly. It placed us at key points throughout galactic history, in positions to potentially influence the development of interspecies relations. You're suggesting your future selves engineered a massive temporal intervention to change history itself? Quills was aghast at the implications. The ethical violations alone would pale in comparison to the alternative. Jackson interrupted. Based on what we've pieced together, the conflict between humanity and the Alliance, or some version of it, was catastrophic for both sides. They reached Quills's department, finding it deserted, except for a few brave or curious students who had returned after the initial shock. Among them was Global, still carefully examining the wooden carving Parker had given them. Professor! Global extended several appendages in greeting. The humans have been teaching us about their concept of music and art. It's fascinating. These functions serve no biological purpose, yet are central to their culture. Yes, fascinating, Quills replied absently, his mind still grappling with temporal ethics. Global, Please gather any students willing to assist with a new research project. We're establishing the first official human studies department." As Global hurried off excitedly, Quills turned back to the humans. "I still have hundreds of questions." "As do we," Jackson assured him. "This cultural exchange works both ways. We're as curious about your species and history as you are about ours." "Then, let us begin properly," Quills decided, activating the department's main research interface. "First, I must understand exactly how inaccurate my previous lectures have been." Over the next several hours, Quills and the human representatives established the foundations of the new academic discipline. Students gradually returned, drawn by curiosity and the unprecedented opportunity to study a living myth. The department's data cores filled with new information as human biology, psychology, and culture were documented with academic rigor rather than mythological speculation. Quills was simultaneously devastated and exhilarated. His previous theories were being systematically demolished. Yet, in their place was arising a far more fascinating reality. The psychological contradictions he had dismissed as mythological impossibilities were revealed as complex adaptive traits. The anatomical absurdities he had ridiculed were demonstrated to be surprisingly effective evolutionary compromises. And most unsettling of all were the aspects of humanity that the myths had actually understated rather than exaggerated. Their technological ingenuity, their cultural diversity, their capacity for both compassion and conflict. As the initial research session concluded, Quills found himself alone with Dr. Jackson in his office, reviewing the preliminary findings. "Your myths got many details wrong," Jackson observed, "but captured something essential about us nonetheless." "The contradictions," Quills agreed. "The myths accurately describe the paradoxical nature of your species, even if they misunderstood the biological mechanisms. Perhaps because those contradictions are what other species found most remarkable about us," Jackson suggested. "Not our anatomy or our technology, but our capacity to embody opposing traits simultaneously." A notification chimed on Quill's communication array. "The Chancellor is calling an emergency session. The Alliance Security Council has expressed concerns about your vessel's presence." Jackson's expression grew serious. "And so it begins." "What do you mean?" "The first steps toward the conflict we hope to prevent," Jackson replied. "Fear, suspicion, security concerns. These are how wars start. But surely with awareness of this potential future, we can avoid it," Quills said as they hurried toward the Chancellor's office. "That's what we're counting on," Jackson nodded. "But history, or future history, has significant momentum." When they arrived at the Chancellor's office, the atmosphere was noticeably tenser than before. Alliance security officials outnumbered academic representatives, and Captain Parker and Ambassador Reeves appeared to be in the middle of a heated discussion with the head of Alliance security. "Absolutely refuse to surrender our vessel," Parker was saying firmly. "We came in peace, but we will not place ourselves at your mercy. Your unannounced arrival constitutes a potential security breach," the security chief countered. "Until we can verify your intentions and this temporal displacement theory, the Alliance must take precautions." Chancellor Voxblin pulsed for attention. "Professor Quills, Dr. Jackson, thank you for joining us. The situation has evolved. The Alliance Security Council has requested that the human vessel be impounded and its crew detained for questioning." Ambassador Reeves explained, her diplomatic tone strained. "We have declined this request." "Detained?" Quills was shocked. "On what grounds? They've cooperated fully with our research." "The temporal displacement theory raises serious concerns," the security chief replied. "If humans possess, or will possess, technology capable of manipulating time itself, they represent an unprecedented threat level." "We don't currently possess that technology," Torres interjected. "We've only found evidence of its use." "So you claim," The security chief responded skeptically. Yet you also claim that future versions of yourselves use this technology to hide from a conflict with us. A conflict you're now potentially instigating by revealing yourselves. The circular logic was maddening. But Quills could see the security chief's perspective. From a purely defensive standpoint, the humans represented an unknown variable with potentially catastrophic implications. Perhaps, Professor Melvadoon suggested, her tentacular crown undulating thoughtfully. We should focus on the evidence at hand, rather than speculation about future conflicts. What evidence? Demanded the security chief. The temporal radiation signatures, Torres said. If you allow me access to your scientific facilities, I can demonstrate that the patterns are consistent with deliberate temporal manipulation, not random anomalies. Chancellor Voxblin pulsed agreement. This seems reasonable. Security concerns are valid, but must be balanced against diplomatic and scientific considerations. After further negotiation, a compromise was reached. The human vessel would remain in orbit under observation, but not impounded. Torres would work with Alliance scientists to verify the temporal radiation data. The rest of the human representatives would continue their cultural exchange at the university, with security observers present, but not interfering. As the meeting adjourned, Quills found himself walking alongside Captain Parker back toward the department. That was uncomfortably close to the first step toward conflict, Parker observed. You anticipated this reaction? Quills asked. It's a predictable response to the unknown, Parker replied, especially when that unknown potentially threatens established power structures. Another human contradiction, Quills noted. You foresaw this negative reaction yet proceeded anyway. Parker smiled. We prefer to call it optimism in the face of probability. We knew the risks, but still believe, that direct engagement is preferable to hiding. When they returned to the department, they found an unexpected scene. Lieutenant Murray had organized an impromptu musical demonstration with several students attempting to produce human-style music using their various biological sound-producing mechanisms. The results were chaotic but enthusiastic, with crystalline students vibrating at various frequencies, gaseous entities pulsing in rhythmic patterns, and even a few tentacled species attempting to manipulate primitive instruments Murray had fabricated. Music, Parker explained, seeing Quills's confusion, is one of our most effective forms of cultural exchange. It bypasses logical barriers and creates emotional connections. Another supposedly useless activity with hidden purpose, Quills observed. Not hidden, Parker corrected. Just not immediately obvious to species that prioritize different forms of utility. Over the next several cycles, the research progressed rapidly. Lieutenant Torres and the Alliance scientists confirmed the temporal radiation patterns, lending credibility to the displacement theory. Dr. Jackson and Professor Quills established the foundational principles of human studies as an academic discipline. Lieutenant Murray continued cultural exchanges through music and art. Yet, beneath the academic progress, political tensions simmered. The Alliance Security Council remained deeply suspicious of the humans' intentions. Some political factions argued for more aggressive containment measures. Others advocated for embracing the opportunity for new diplomatic relations. The humans themselves seemed both concerned by these developments and strangely unsurprised by them, as if they had expected resistance but remained committed to their course nonetheless. 10 cycles after the humans' arrival, Lieutenant Torres requested an urgent meeting with Quills, Parker, and the Chancellor. When they gathered in the secure conference room, her expression was grave. We've completed our analysis of the temporal radiation patterns, she announced. And we've discovered something unexpected. She activated a holographic display showing a complex pattern of energy signatures spreading across both space and time. The displacement wasn't a single event, she explained. It was a progressive series of interventions, becoming more concentrated toward a specific temporal focal point. Meaning, Chancellor Voxblin prompted. meaning that whatever conflict the displacement was meant to prevent has a specific triggering event, a moment in time when tensions finally erupt into open hostility. And, Parker asked, though his expression suggested he already suspected the answer. And based on our calculations, that trigger point is approximately 6 galactic cycles from now. Torres concluded. Something about this moment, our arrival, your response, the next decisions we collectively make, sets in motion events leading to conflict. A heavy silence fell over the room. Unless we change it, Parker said finally. That's the whole point of the displacement strategy, to change the future by altering the past. How? Quills asked. If this conflict is somehow inevitable. Nothing is inevitable, Parker interrupted firmly. That's another human trait your myths got right. We don't accept no-win scenarios. Chancellor Voxblin pulsed thoughtfully. What do you propose, Captain? Complete transparency, Parker replied without hesitation. We share everything we know about the temporal displacement evidence. We engage directly with the Alliance Security Council. We demonstrate that humanity's interest is in cooperation, not conflict. And if they don't believe you? Quills asked. Then we keep trying, Parker insisted. We don't give up because something is difficult. Torres adjusted the holographic display. There's more. The radiation patterns suggest that the displacement placed humans throughout history with specific purpose, not just to hide us, but to position us to influence key historical moments. Like sleeper agents? The Chancellor asked, alarm evident in his pulsing form. No, Torres shook her head. More like cultural ambassadors, placed to introduce certain ideas, technologies, or perspectives at critical junctures, including the myths themselves, Quills realized suddenly. The myths about humans weren't just records of encounters with time-displaced individuals. They were deliberately crafted narratives meant to prepare your cultures for eventual contact. Precisely, Torres nodded. The myths emphasized our contradictions, our adaptability, our artistic capacities, traits that would eventually help forge understanding between our species. This is ethically complex, the Chancellor observed. Deliberate manipulation of cultural development across multiple civilizations. Compared to the alternative, mutual destruction, it was apparently deemed the more ethical choice, Parker said quietly. As they continued discussing implications, a security alert sounded. The Chancellor accessed the communication array. A fleet of Alliance security vessels has entered orbit, he reported. They're demanding the humans surrender for formal interrogation. Parker's expression hardened. And so history attempts to repeat itself. What will you do? Quills asked. Break the cycle, Parker replied. Chancellor, I request permission to address the Alliance Council directly, not as a suspect under interrogation, but as a representative of a species seeking peaceful recognition. The following hours were a blur of diplomatic negotiations, security protocols, and academic debates. Eventually, a compromise was reached. Captain Parker would address the full Alliance Council, with his crew remaining under protective custody at the university. The address was scheduled for the next cycle. In the interim, Quills and his team worked frantically to compile all their research on human psychology, culture, and the temporal displacement theory. If Parker was to convince the Council of Humanity's peaceful intentions, he would need every piece of evidence they could provide. The night before the address, Quills found Parker in the department's observation dome, staring up at the stars. Contemplating your speech? Quills asked. Contemplating history, Parker replied. Or futures that may never happen. You believe you can prevent the conflict? Parker turned to face him. I have to believe it. Otherwise, what's the point of any of this? If war is truly inevitable, then our future selves would have chosen a different strategy than temporal displacement. Perhaps they tried other strategies first, Quills suggested. Perhaps this was the last resort. Perhaps, Parker nodded. But they still chose a strategy that preserved possibility, rather than one that embraced finality. They scattered us through time not just to hide us, but to position us to create a different outcome. A tremendous gamble, Quills observed. Hope usually is, Parker smiled. Another human contradiction. We make the most irrational decisions in the name of hope. Yet those decisions sometimes produce the most rational outcomes. The next morning, the Alliance Council convened in the Grand Chamber, a massive amphitheater designed to accommodate representatives of all member species. Security was unprecedented, with scanners, barriers, and armed guards positioned throughout. Captain Parker stood alone on the central platform, a solitary human figure surrounded by the assembled representatives of hundreds of worlds. Quills watched from a designated academic observation area, alongside Dr. Jackson, Torres, Murray, and the other humans who had been permitted to attend. Representatives of the Galactic Alliance, Parker began, his voice amplified throughout the chamber. I stand before you as both an anomaly and a revelation, a supposedly mythological being made flesh, a representative of a species your cultures have simultaneously remembered and forgotten. He activated a holographic display showing the temporal radiation patterns Torres had discovered. The evidence suggests that at some point in our mutual future, a catastrophic conflict occurs between humanity and your alliance. A conflict so devastating that future humans employed extraordinary measures to prevent it, scattering our species across time and space, turning us into myths rather than neighbors, stories rather than threats. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. I could stand here and promise you that humanity comes in peace, Parker continued. I could offer scientific cooperation, cultural exchange, diplomatic relations. And I do offer these things. But promises and offerings mean little when set against the evidence that conflict somehow remains our destiny. He paused, looking around at the assembled representatives. Instead, I offer you a question. If our future selves went to such extraordinary lengths to prevent this conflict, doesn't that suggest it can be prevented? That despite apparent inevitability, another path exists? The chamber had fallen completely silent. The myths about humans that Professor Quills so eloquently taught, even while disbelieving them, captured something essential about us. We are contradictory creatures. We are simultaneously fragile and resilient, logical and emotional, competitive and cooperative, and most importantly, we refuse to accept predetermined outcomes. Parker's voice grew stronger. Whatever triggers the conflict between us lies approximately 6 cycles in our future. We can choose to view this knowledge as proof of inevitability, or as an unprecedented opportunity to consciously change our course, to write a new myth together, not of conflict, but of cooperation. He gestured to the temporal radiation display. Our future selves didn't just hide us. They positioned us throughout history to influence cultural development, to prepare your civilizations for eventual contact, not as infiltrators or manipulators, but as contributors to a shared future. They believed, even in the face of catastrophe, that another outcome was possible. The council chamber remained silent as Parker concluded his address. I stand before you not as a myth made flesh, but as a neighbor introducing himself for the first time. Humanity extends its hand in friendship, in cooperation, and in the shared belief that destiny is not predetermined but created, choice by choice, decision by decision, moment by moment. The silence that followed seemed to stretch eternally. Then, slowly, representatives began to signal their desire to respond. The debate that followed was intense, with factions quickly forming around positions of caution, engagement, or outright rejection. Hours later, the Council reached its initial decision. Humanity would be granted provisional recognition and a probationary diplomatic status. The human vessel would remain under observation, but not detention. Cultural and scientific exchanges would continue under monitored conditions. A special commission would be established to investigate the temporal displacement evidence and its implications. It wasn't victory, but it wasn't conflict either. It was possibility. Exactly what Parker had requested. As the council adjourned, Quills approached Parker. "A remarkable address, Captain. Though I notice you carefully avoided making any specific promises about human intentions." Parker smiled. "Because intentions change with circumstances. What I promised instead was our commitment to finding a path that avoids mutual destruction. That's an intention I can guarantee, regardless of how circumstances evolve. And if the council had rejected your proposal, if they had ordered your detention or worse, then we would have found another way," Parker said simply. "When there is no path forward, humans make one." In the days that followed, the university became the center of unprecedented activity. The new Human Studies department expanded rapidly, with students and faculty from across the Alliance requesting transfers to participate. Lieutenant Torres and Alliance scientists established a joint research initiative to further investigate the temporal displacement technology. Ambassador Reeves began formal diplomatic proceedings with the Alliance Foreign Relations Committee. And Professor Quills found himself completely rewriting his curriculum, transforming Mythological Xenology 57 into Human Anthropology. Myth becomes reality. One cycle. As he was preparing notes for his first official lecture on human psychology, Quills received a visit from Global, who had become the department's most enthusiastic student. "Professor," Global began, tentacles undulating excitedly, "I've been studying the carved wooden object Captain Parker gave me, and I've noticed something remarkable." "Yes?" Quills prompted. "The patterns carved into it. They match certain mathematical sequences found in 17 different Alliance species development. It's as if the human who created it intuitively recognized patterns that connect diverse life forms." Quills examined the object carefully. "Are you suggesting this was deliberately crafted to demonstrate cross-species mathematical commonality?" "No." Global's color shifted to indicate uncertainty. "Captain Parker said his grandfather created it simply because he found the shape pleasing. Yet somehow, he intuitively reproduced patterns that connect, rather than divide." Quills felt a sudden insight forming. Perhaps that's the final human contradiction. Global. They simultaneously create division and connection, conflict and cooperation, without conscious intent. Their instincts lead them toward the very patterns that unite diverse life, even as their fears drive them toward separation. "Do you think they'll succeed?" Global asked. "In preventing the conflict? I mean..." Quills considered the question carefully. The myths described humans as simultaneously the most destructive and most creative force in existence. Perhaps both potentials always exist within them, and within us. The question is which potential we collectively nurture. He placed the carved object carefully back in Global's appendage. "Keep studying this, Global. Perhaps understanding how humans intuitively recognize connecting patterns will help us create new ones together." As Global departed, Quills returned to his notes. The lecture tomorrow would be unlike any he had ever given. Not a dismissal of myth as fantasy, but an exploration of how myth becomes reality, and how reality sometimes surpasses even the most persistent legends. Outside his window, he could see Lieutenant Murray conducting another musical exchange with students, their disparate biological structures somehow producing harmonious vibrations. Nearby, Dr. Jackson was engaged in animated discussion with Professor Melvadoon about cultural transmission patterns. In the research center, Torres and Alliance scientists were mapping temporal radiation signatures. The future that had led to conflict remained a possibility. But so did the future, where that conflict was averted, a future being crafted choice by choice, interaction by interaction, moment by moment. When Captain Parker had asked Quills what he would teach, now that humans had been proven real, Quills had responded with academic precision. Human anthropology, an introduction to the galaxy's most improbable species. But as he watched the interactions unfolding across the campus, humans and alliance species finding common ground despite their differences. He realized a more accurate title might be Human Potential: How Contradiction Creates Possibility. For in the end, that seemed to be the essence of humanity, not merely their physical form or their psychological traits, but their capacity to embody opposing potentials simultaneously. To be both the creators of conflict and the architects of peace. To face annihilation, yet imagine alternatives. To be myths made flesh, yet surpass even their own legends. As the sun set over the university, casting long shadows across the grounds where humans and aliens continued their exchanges, Quills made a final note for his lecture. Perhaps the greatest myth about humans was not that they couldn't exist, but that we couldn't coexist. Tomorrow, we begin writing a new story together.